If you need to do some maintenance to the suspension on your 2005 to 2015 pre-runner or four-wheel drive Tacoma, these front lower control arms with ball joints will be a great addition to that list. Now, lower control arm ball joints and bushings don't last forever, as you may know, and when they do start to go, they can cause some slop in your steering and run down your drivability, especially if you've already modified your suspension. Now, this set here will be a great solution to tightening up your ride for better handling with a direct OE style replacement, which will work very well in daily driving or even off-road applications. These again are going to be incredibly close in design with the factory control arms, which will not only mimic that when it comes to fitment, but it's going to come in that ride quality aspect as well. Now, your front end handling will improve drastically, allowing you a more comfortable ride on the road and more confidence when you're off-road with your Tacoma that you'll have a strong unit holding your suspension together. This will do that while being a direct bolt-in mod, so you really don't have to worry about any modifications, drilling, or any extra hassle when it comes to installing this set. These will be made of high quality steel materials that will be incredibly durable and able to withstand day-to-day and again, off-road abuse. Now, the A-arm will be covered in a black powder coat finish to prevent any rusting over time and maintain that integrity. These will also come with ball joints and bushings pre-installed, also with a factory-like construction, which will help with articulation in a controlled manner and eliminate any clunking or any additional movement that you wouldn't want. Now, everything will also be pre-greased, so no need to worry about any additional steps up front when you're installing them. These will be pretty average when it comes to price at about $325. Now, I think what's great about this option is you really don't have to question when it comes to install what you're getting out of the package here and the quality in the set. You'll be getting everything that you need to drastically improve your drivability in a trusted set of A-arms for whatever adventure you're taking, so I think for that $325, this is going to be well worth the price. Install will be a 2 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter, taking you about 2 hours to get the job done with the right tools and the right setup. Now, speaking of the install, one of our customers has actually installed this on their Tacoma and is going to walk you through what that process looks like step by step. So that's going to wrap it up for me. Let's go ahead and get into it.
So here we have laid out all the tools you're going to need for this install and possibly some alternatives if you don't have some of these tools. So you're going to need a jack to lift up the truck, jack stands for some added safety, a rubber mallet, a weighted hammer, needle nose pliers, something to mark your cam alignment tabs, a flathead screwdriver, and here's where we're going to get into some alternatives. What I use in the video is an impact with a 19mm socket and a 24mm socket. But if you don't have an impact and you're just using wrenches, you're going to need a 19mm wrench and a 24mm wrench, as well as a 24mm socket, a 19mm socket, and a 12mm socket, and the ratchet of your choice, as well as a torque wrench and a breaker bar. Hello everybody, and today I'm going to be showing you how to install lower control arms on a second gen Tacoma from the years 2005 to 2015. So since my truck is on aftermarket suspension, it has to droop out a little more, I had to use the wood blocks to jack it up off the ground enough, but now that we have it on jack stands, we took out the blocks and jacked it from the actual mounting point, so we're not hitting the skid plate, because the next step is to go ahead and take the skid plate off so we can get to the bolts on the front of the lower control arms. So you're gonna grab a 12mm socket and go ahead and unbolt the 4 bolts on the skid plate. There's gonna be 2 in the front and 2 in the back. All right, now here's a tip that I got from one of my buddies who does alignments. He says make sure you mark the tabs front and back of the front and back of the control arm, so when you go to reinstall it, you'll still have the same marks and you'll kind of get a pretty good alignment, but after this whole process, you should still go ahead and get an alignment because it will adjust it a bit. So we're gonna go ahead and mark this up a little bit so when we go to reinstall it, we kind of know a general area. Okay, now before we go ahead and start unbolting everything, one last thing we want to remove for safety is the ABS sensor, which is going to be right below the ball joint castle nut that we have to take off. So to do this, I'm getting a flathead and wedging it in below the tab and just wiggling it off. All right, with that out of the way, we should be good to go and unbolt the 3 different points on this. Now, given that I have a little bit of a different setup than a stock Tacoma, I have a little more travel out of the suspension stuff, the way I found works best for me is to work from the inside out, removing the inner points first, then moving to the shock, and then finally hitting the ball joint out of the spindle. So we're gonna take our impact here with a 19mm to undo the front and the rear bolts of the inside. And it's good practice, especially with these inside bolts, since there's a lot of components, to put it all back together between uses so you don't lose any of it and you keep the orientation that it's supposed to be in. All right, that's a little stuck in there, so we're gonna get a mallet or a hammer and hit it out. Could also be the tension from the backside dropping, so if you relieve some of that tension by lifting it. All right, again, my setup is a little different than a stock truck, so the hardware size might be different, but I'm gonna be using a 19 on the impact again to remove the bolt on the lower shock. I'm gonna leave it flush with the end, so it, oh, never mind, it's coming out. If your bolt is seized or kind of stuck in there, just put the nut all the way flush with the end of it so you can hit that with the hammer and you're not messing up the end of the bolt itself. And again, keeping all that hardware together is going to help you out in the long run. So now that we have the back points or the inner points done, the middle point done, which is the lower shock, now all we have to worry about is getting the cotter pin out of the castle nut, take the castle nut off, and then hammering it out. So if you do a lot of off-roading, the grime and the dirt might really build up in here, and it might be a little difficult to get the cotter pin out. So if you do have trouble, it's best to just try to find a leverage point on this lower assembly here and just try to pry it out however best you can. Also, the upside to using needle nose is if you can get one of the prongs into the eye of the cotter pin, it makes it so much easier to again get that leverage point if you can get it inside. Come on, dude. It's right there. Ooh. Wow. It actually broke the cotter pin inside of the castle nut. Look at the whole prong's gone. I see it right here. All right, now switching to the castle nut on the bottom of the ball joint, we're gonna switch to a 22mm and go ahead and break that off with the impact. Now, same thing as I suggested up top, just thread this nut back on backwards, flush with the bolt, so you have a nice surface to hit without messing anything up. Because it doesn't matter since they give you a whole new ball joint, which is nice, and a new castle nut. So now we're gonna take our weighted hammer / mallet and go ahead and knock it out. So now that it's pushed all the way up to the castle nut, we're gonna go ahead and thread it off. Maybe give it a few more love taps to get it out if it won't come out by hand. All right, so since we have the back side out, we can actually knock that out of the 2 holders. So this has a better angle of actually coming out. Because right now it's kind of locked in at an odd angle. So let's drop some of this out and give it a better angle. All right, now you have the whole lower out. All right, so now we're gonna grab our new lower control arms, take off this castle nut, and remove this, what I think is a very nice protective cover for the rubber on your ball joint. Now we're gonna go ahead and reverse the process we just did, starting with the outermost, which is the ball joint, sliding it back in. I'm just gonna snug up this castle nut for the time being. We'll go ahead and retighten everything at the end. Okay, so now you're just gonna raise the two insides back into their housings. We're gonna get the bolts and just thread them through. Now again, with the different suspension geometry between mine and the stock vehicle, you might find it easier to do it in a different order, either working your way inside out or outside in, but this is the way I found works best for me. So now we're gonna go ahead and slide the bolt housing through the lower control arm, making sure that the marks we made at the beginning are still lining up. We're gonna go ahead and feed the bolt through and get the back side on and threaded. And this is the part before it gets too tight where you're really gonna wanna pay attention to those marks we made earlier and make sure that the alignment is pretty close to what it was when you took it off. Now you're gonna go ahead and repeat the same process on the back side of the inner. Gonna go ahead and slide the bolt through, line up the marks you made at the beginning and thread it. All right, now the last bolt we got to put back in is the one through the lower shock. Now moving on to the lower shock bolt, we're going to torque it to 101 foot-pounds with a 19 millimeter. Now we're going to go ahead and torque down all of our bolts that we took off today, starting with the ball joint on the lower with the castle nut. That's going to go to 112 foot-pounds. All right, now moving on to the inner part of the lower control arm, the frame bolts, those are going to go to 96 foot-pounds, and we're still using the 19 millimeter. All right, so now that everything is tight, let's go back to that castle nut and get that cotter pin installed. Now, when you torqued it down, you might have covered up the hole with one of the points on it. So what you're gonna wanna do is go ahead and adjust it so the hole is exposed and you could fit that cotter pin between the points of the castle nut. All right, so feed it through, grab some needle nose pliers and go ahead and bend those prongs down and around. Now that castle nut's in and the cotter pin is through, go ahead and reconnect your ABS sensor. All right, now that everything's torqued down and put back together, the last thing to do is to jack the truck back up if you lowered it any, put the wheels and tires back on, put the skid plate back on, and then we're good to go. All right, so lastly, you're gonna take your 12 millimeter and go ahead and tighten all 4 bolts on the skid plate, holding it back up to the truck.
So That's going to wrap it up for my review and the install of these front lower control arms with ball joints fitting all 2005 to 2015 pre-runner and four-wheel drive Toyota Tacomas. And remember, for all things Tacoma, keep it right here at extremeterrain.com.